Alright, so we crash. I've been analyzing at that dude's company. The reality is that in the real estate world, he really was able to take what is leasing office space and he was able to turn that into a very profitable business. A profitable business that, if he starts buying those buildings, would even be even smarter. But that one of the things about a tech startup that isn't really tech, it emulates all things about a tech startup. There's innovations of tech that could be workflow AIs and stuff that could be put into a generic workflow, like AI for scheduling, for drinking time, and to be structuring people's days so that they actually do work or something. So there's a wide world of actual like tech development for AI that could go into that guy's company for his office spaces that he could offer as part of the service. There's something that could add value addedness to it. But I noticed that he was doing succulent, minimalist, modern office spaces in like a Facebook way. So there's a whole wide world of other type of modern, mid-century modern, that could work around like chairs like this. You know, this is a hamper, but it's like a retro hamper. Stuff that could be like a Don Draper office in Mad Men. And so there's like another interior design idea that would probably have more work than we in it. That potentially could be like a pilot office that I mean, it's still, you know, up here in the Northwest, like say Seattle, okay? So sure, minimalist, succulent, Copernico, Apple office. That stuff works in Seattle also. But there's a real hipster world up here that does artful AI tech development startup. And that those people tend to be more of like the retro mid-century modern kind of like people. They're the ones that wear all the Francois Hardy kind of clothes and stuff like that. And all the like Who mod kind of clothing and punk rock kind of stuff. And so there's a real potential for having like a different type of interior design to that stuff that maybe would be like a smart way of diversifying in ways. And so that is kind of where somebody like me, I have like a feminist magazine startup that, you know, my envisionment was to find kind of an open office space, kind of loft kind of idea, but in like a smaller town where the rent and stuff for an office space would be smaller. Okay, so that's kind of like but I've envisioned, because I like mid-century modern interior design, and so then all the lesbians and humans that I know, they tend to be more on the hipster side, and that they're kind of the target for who I would want to bring in on like essentially it's like an edgy version of Bitch Magazine that they tend to do. Bitch Magazine tends to do the more intellectual women's and gender studies kind of feminist magazine, and mine's kind of centered around, you know, the problems of feminist people in the world. Most of them do orgies and get into dark webs, and then they end up like, then they end up getting stuck in like S&Ms, and then they end up getting those gay speakers, and then people start fucking with them and those speakers and shit. And so part of my like intelligence gathering stuff is centered around figuring out like what those people would have to do to be leaving that type of world. The sex the sex fetish cult world is getting fucking crazy nowadays. And so that is where, and that then it's meant to have more like punk rock, riot girl kind of articles, stuff that's like fuck you misogyny kind of articles, right? It's meant for that. It's meant it's meant to make misogynists mad about like a guy saying cunt that's a feminist and then feminists not getting mad about it. But then if some asshole misogynist says it, for all feminists to circle around them and hate them. It's meant for that. It's meant to build a psychological breakdown. Well, here in Tri-Cities, they have like a dark web, like it's like a feminist sex fetish kind of world around here in my hometown. And that around here, the guys that are in it, they have to get a certain number of feminist points. And then once they achieve a certain number of feminist points, then they can say cunt. And then I mean that's what it is. And then all the feminists around here, they don't care. I mean it's humorous because they're like a lot of them are like tech nerds, and that they like to get the computer points and stuff. So they like figure out and optimize how to get all of this feminist points and stuff. And so there's like a real movement that gets people to be like striving to be getting feminist points and stuff. And so and that's kind of the thought process around it. Whether they're being facetious about it or not, they're still doing feminism. And as I groom their brain with those points and essentially what is a dark web that I kind of like, I have the top profile in. See, I groom their brain into constantly getting feminist points. And then eventually they get so many that feminist women start having sex with their dumb tech nerd ass. Right? And then they start to realize, wait, these feminist points get us sex with women that don't like to go around and secretly suck guys' dicks everywhere. You know, I'm a genius. When it comes to the lesbians, they have to get cock points. Where essentially, around here, the feminists, they attempt to act misogynist at the misogynists, and then they say cock. This is the next phase. Then they say cock, and they can't say cock until they get enough lesbian misogyny points. And that's kind of like where they'll be lesbian, and then one will be like a manly lesbian, and the other one will be like a womanly lesbian, and then they'll kind of do like the soft version of sub-dom. And then the dom gets like all these misogyny points, and then they say cock. And then they have to get more points. And so what that does is, in lots of ways, what was observed in like a sociology way around here is that in lots of ways, lesbians, and this is what it is for the lesbians, there usually will be one that's more like me, that's like a little more manly and stuff. And then there'll be one that's more like witch, which is kind of womanly and princessy. And then most of the lesbians are always like, they're always like hippies, and everybody's just soft and doing lesbian-y and stuff. And so then they were having these women that would, the womanly ones still need some sort of like manliness at them. So it was like grooming these like more manlier lesbians into being a little more manlier at them. And then it builds a more healthy relationship. And so this is kind of the stuff that like my magazine startup is based around, like that idea. It kind of deviates from the politically correct, like Miss and Bitch magazine kind of world, okay? But they have this like other online blog called Feministing that shut down. And that those women would have, they kind of seem, just from their like symbol, which is like a trucker mud flap with a chick with like like a Daisy Duke with her finger up, okay? And so they seem like the kind of chicks that would probably understand my like theoretical approach to like a more edgy kind of feminism. And that then there's all these like punk rock chicks that are like, they can get more manly points than me at any moment. They're like the hardcore feminazi kind of chicks. They are. And that and so it's kind of geared around that. And then the whole idea is that subversively the gays like kind of like found all of these hoity-toity like Miss Magazine slash women's and gender studies type of feminist chicks and shit. And then they kind of pitched some of my ideas as like a market research. And that then it was like something that they would be like willing to like buy as like a magazine or to be frequenting as like an online website. And so that's why I like, you know, I waited for them to figure out if those chicks would even look at something like that. And then they came back to me and they were like, yeah, basically. And so that's kind of like where I then, this was like in 2018, then I started to like lay out my, all the stuff for like, basically I have like a front loaded file database of millions of I mean, it could potentially turn into millions of articles that nobody would have to like search for what to have. Or it's like, here's this next topic, and that here's like something. This is like included like stuff about tech world and shit, and like pedophiles versus D&D guys and stuff like that. See, these are other kind of article ideas that like, here's an article idea that could be expounded on and stuff like that. And then I have like whole huge numbers of books, written notes, that essentially it could be like just sitting there as like a written down database of my own that could be poured through by teams of researchers and reporters and journalists that could essentially turn into nobody really having to think about what do I write about today. Like, it's already thought of. And then a lot of it comes from like the questions that people in the gay and lesbian and feminist and liberal world, like all the like questions that they have on dark web, it kind of crowdsources from that stuff. Then it becomes like a research that I do. And then I attempt to figure out all the intelligence explanations to where then they would be able to bypass understanding what that stuff would be about, and then they would be able to start targeting directly, like finding people to talk to that fall into the explanation that's already been researched. So then it saves time. And then everybody can sit around playing pool and ping pong and getting drunk, because then nobody would have to envision or whatever. And then it's also about like training people to be envisioning. But I'm a super genius, and essentially another aspect to my stuff, which is it's meant to build like a backstory to my tech magazine startup. It's like, misogynists hate it when feminists make a man their bitch. And so then my ex-wife, who I still care about and is my Achilles heel in the world, she's my Delilah. My whole backstory is about getting the horrible feminist witch to be making man or bitch. That's my feminist backstory. And so there's a real marketability to that. And that it would really be marketable to like Gloria Steinem and those type of chicks and shit, because they know about all that weird New York City, like, feminist hatred man kind of shit. And that for a feminist Wonder Woman to come in and to just make a man her fucking bitch. It's called optimization. And here in the Northwest, we do what's called bro, where the bros know that bros have a whole, like, huge intellectual, well, I do, have a whole intellectual ability of optimization of all things that have potentials for, like, marketing and shit. Okay? And so that's where, in the end, I can prove that I'm a man by not giving a fuck about my horrible feminist Satan cunt witch making me her bitch. And you see that a company that seems to have probably a lot of, like, feminist. This explanation, you see all the horrible misogyny that came out of my mouth? See, those chicks, they know how to comprehend what I'm saying. And then anybody else that doesn't comprehend what I'm saying and sits around going, he's not a feminist. Those type of chicks, they would know that I was a feminist. And then those type of chicks, when they're in their little lesbian witches coven, they probably call each other cunts sometimes, because they can. They're lesbians and feminists and shit. See, this is like where one of the things about a dark web is that the witches, lesbian, feminist world, it gets observed by tech nerds sometimes, like, these witches get mad when you say cunt. But here they are saying cunt. And that's because they don't mean it in the same way. Just like I don't mean it in the same way. And so, nowadays, since there's always, like, a human balance, this is what it is in Tri-Cities. I mean, you know, when it comes to Tri-Cities, there's, like, the world's most horrible misogyny here. And that with that, I attempt to influence and get people to understand the intellectual mentality of balance. And so with that comes the world's most beautiful human feminism. Okay? And so currently we got the cunt word, where everybody has to work up to get the cunt word. And then now the next step in human is to make cock the male version of a cunt word. See, what I want is for this chick that lives in Pasco that like went to Washington D.C. and is all idealistic and stuff and kind of seems like a granola hippie lesbian a little bit. I want her to get all these misogyny points just to walk up to my face and go, cock. No, she's like a super liberal. It's like some chick that was being an idealistic, like, liberal in the world's most horrible conservative area. She would be the prime example of the type of person that would probably understand the idea. Because they're kind of like, they're like, it's like they have the gay world, okay? Like the normal kind of gay dark web world. But then they have, like, this feminist world, because a lot of people a lot of people don't like to, like, drink wine and go shopping at Ulta all the time. I mean, it's kind of like a more tech nerdy kind of world here, where they don't work out and they're not in shape and they're not fashionable and shit. And, like, so they kind of have, like, two separate kind of feminist worlds here. Gay that acts misogyny at each other, and then the feminists. And so the feminist world is kind of where I attempt to build, like, what that would mean. And then it's meant to piss off a whole world. Like, all this QAnon, misogyny, sub-dom, 50 slutting shit. That's why I research here. Because everything that happens in everybody's big city happens here. And I have somewhat of a research ability that is like very, very top level here. And since everybody just kind of does everything and is everywhere, it gives me like a direct ability of like researching like what their thought process is and what their how they think and shit. See, this whole town is like all about like it's basically exploiting people. And it's like what people do when they think that nobody is seeing or knowing what they're doing. And that with that, there's a real, you know, in ways, I've built mine into legal because they find my profile in the dark web around here and then they have their little secret discussions. And then, since they're getting in the way of my make lesbians and gays smart and all the feminist dudes and all the D&D guys, I have like a low volume brainwash of genius MIT lecture kind of stuff as a development for all of them. And that these people keep getting in the way of it. And so with that, they do discussions because in the past, my profile used to have what's called a Nazi pedocup discussion app. And it was gifted to me for things that happened to me as a child. It was gifted to me and it's actually for me. And it's just it's a secure discussion system. But it's not secure anymore because stupid fucking pedophiles keep using it. And so with that comes a sociological research to understand. And so with that, it gives me extra ideas on these articles for essentially what is a modern edgy sociology magazine geared around like outing the internal most inner thoughts of what dumb fucking pedophile psychopaths that think that they're men. See, in this town, if you're not a stay-at-home dad that makes beautiful lesbian food and takes care of the child and then does like the shabby chic stuff and then does whatever your stupid witch wants, then you're not being a man. In like the straight man way. That's how a straight man's supposed to be in the Tri-Cities. That's, well, at least in that system. And then the rest of these people, they sat around calling me a fag all the time. And it's like, then that's where I find like these D&D nerds that all those people that do misogyny, they freak out and they start like sucking dicks everywhere because everybody sees their pedophilia. And then they start stacking their blackmail like shit with like sucking dicks all the time. And then those guys show what the difference is. No, around here, since nobody respects anybody's privacy, it becomes a huge live broadcasted kind of a thing. And like, there'll be these cops that'll call me like gay all the time. And then all these like D&D nerds, these cops, they get like these like misogyny based S&M clubs that are like high priced prostitution clubs. They end up getting the like ripped off prototype camera eye stuff. Yeah, then all the D&D nerds end up showing. They'll like go to Gold's Gym. And then right afterward, they'll like look at a guy. And then those guys will leave. And then they'll start butt fucking each other and shit. And then they sit around calling everybody a fag all the time. Well, if you happen to be in the rest of the world that has seen that type of stuff, Hi, I'm Jared. This is Tri-Cities Darknet. And that, if you're wondering where all that type of stuff comes from, it basically comes from Tri-Cities, Washington. Well, if you see that stuff, you'll see horrible stuff too. They do the most horrible, rotten Satanism here. Also, that's really the purpose for the reasonings for that. But the to be able to broadcast the culprits for that type of stuff who were doing that stuff in secret with impunity for so many years, then you'll have to understand that it costs a lot of dark web money to be able to out those people, or at least to be documenting those people. So with that comes loans. I mean, here's the truth. And that with that, these tech nerds who were doing the same thing for like a complete side reason, basically, they like exploit all of those people for money to pay back the loans that gives them the ability of broadcasting that stuff to like Patty Murray and the White House and basically. I mean, this is what it's come to. These people do like monthly, like raping and killing of children in like the most authentic, highly like satanic Jewish and satanic Christian and satanic Islam and satanic Buddhist ways. So, oh yeah, that's the other thing about my magazine startup. It's about hatred of pedophilia, and that I'm a victim of all four forms of that Satanism as a child. That's what these scars really represent. They're like different forms of Satanism that are essentially like a balance to like what would be considered righteous, non-satanic ritual religions. So I tend to document all that type of stuff because that is where to put my man wiener on my feminist magazine, it requires hatred of pedophilia. Because around here, what I found was that there was a subversive thought amongst lots of people in the dark web about how feminism was a pedophile accepting world. And then my ex-wife started having friends that were that. And then that's where she was dumb. Because feminists fuck witch. They do. I've seen these lesbians. They're just like men. They are. They fuck witch. They do. And that's right. Anything that makes like a bad kind of label or name for feminism. See, as a child, the women that were able to prevent people from like raping me at like what would be like a rainbow gathering in my city were witches. Witches that commanded penises around in front of me. And that was my early understanding of what feminism was. Like biker women that would tell these bikers like what to do, and that nobody ever told them what to do. And then like some bikery woman would come in and would yell at them, and then they would do what she would say and shit. And so that is like, as like a 6 or 7 year old boy that was around these weird pedophiles and misogynists and shit all the time doing that stuff. See, that was my first understanding of feminism. And so that may be a little more extreme than what would be the normal kind of world. But the whole idea is that I labeled feminism as fuck witch, because essentially as a little boy, it was like pedophiles and fuck witch. And that was my two thoughts on how I would label people. Because if they fuck kids, then it would be like me and all the little girls that were my age. And then they would rape us. And nobody was allowed to rape my little witches. They were mine. and I was protective of them. And so that's kind of the backstory of what that would be. That's the well man part. And then Witch has her, she took women's and gender studies and journalism, my ex-wife. And so that's her section. But mine's about hatred of pedophilia, which is essential. It's essential to the edginess. Because nobody ever talks about weird pedophile stuff. Nobody ever talks about it. Okay? Nobody ever talks about weird pedophile stuff. And so I envision a future of all of the stuff that nobody talks about. That a lot of that stuff is held behind like a world where people are essentially like blackmailed. If like at Miss Magazine or Bitch Magazine, you know, some of them do like lesbian orgy or something, and it ends up getting recorded magically somehow. And then if they were to talk about the pedophile Satanism stuff, somebody would like post that stuff on their website. So I don't have those images. I do monogamy. I fuck witch. One witch. You're not allowed to fuck anything other than your Delilah. Them's the rules. If you're a dude that fucks witch, you're only allowed to fuck your witch Delilah. And them's the rules. You're not allowed to David on that. You're not allowed to Solomon. You can only do Samson. That the witch gets to cut his hair off and still fucks witch.